The night Memphis air hung heavy with sweat and promise as Elvis Presley slid into the back seat of his Cadillac, freshly signed contract burning a hole in his pocket. He'd just agreed to the biggest tour of his life. Stadiums filled with screaming fans, spotlights brighter than daylight. But tonight, his eyes were quiet. Ahead, a lone figure trudged past the neon glow of the Cadillac showroom. A black custodian in a threadbare uniform, mop slung over one shoulder. The man paused at the window, staring long at a gleaming white Cadillac inside. His shoulders sagged, as if the car's shine mocked the years he'd spent pushing brooms in shadows. Elvis's jaw tightened. "Stop here," he told his driver. The engine died, and the silence between them stretched sharp. Under the showroom light, Elvis watched the custodian's bowed head, feeling the weight of a dream he'd once almost let slip away. Tonight, fame would wait. Something far more urgent demanded his voice. "Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story." That evening in August felt different the moment the sun dipped behind the cotton-pickin' fields and the streetlights flickered on, one by one, along Elvis Presley Boulevard. The air hung thick with humidity and the distant buzz of cicadas, a gentle reminder that summer in Memphis cared little for fame or fortune. Elvis sat back in the leather bench of his personal Cadillac, its white paint gleaming beneath the dealership's neon sign. His driver eased the car forward, tires whispering across the hot asphalt, and gave a perfunctory wave to the salesman at the curb. Elvis's mind wasn't on the grand tour contract he had signed that afternoon, an unprecedented deal that would take him coast to coast, filling stadiums for the first time. In the rearview mirror, he caught sight of a solitary figure trudging along the sidewalk. A black man, perhaps in his 60s, uniform faded and patched, carrying a dust mop over one shoulder. The man paused at the huge plate glass window of the showroom, peering in as though he sought refuge from life's relentless grind. Inside, tier upon tier of Cadillacs gleamed like a row of frozen jewels. The old man lingered, head dipped, shoulders heavy. There was a weariness about him, the slump of his back, the slow gait of shuffling feet, that struck Elvis in the gut. He knew this street well. As a child, he had run past these gleaming showrooms with his mama, dreaming of shiny cars he could never afford. Now, he'd signed the contract of a lifetime just hours ago, and here was a man who looked at those very cars with the mixture of longing and resignation that Elvis remembered tasting in his own mouth a decade before. "Wait," Elvis said, voice low but absolute. His driver's hand hovered near the shifter. "Park here." They rolled to a stop beside the showroom entrance as the old man resumed his journey, gaze fixed on the polished hoods. A bead of sweat traced the elder's temple. Elvis slipped out of the Cadillac, white loafers crunching on the gravel. The sound was startling in the hush of the night. He walked up behind the man, careful not to startle him, then gently spoke. "Sir." The cleaner froze, mop halfway to his shoulder. He spun, startled, eyes widening to orbs of disbelief. Elvis tipped back his sunglasses, revealing the calm, earnest look of a boy who once had nothing. The cleaner stepped back, confusion knitting his brow. Elvis pointed to the row of white Cadillacs. "See that one? It's yours." Silence fell, punctuated only by the dealership's humming sign. The old man shook his head, lips parting as though to protest. But no words came. He swallowed and looked from Elvis's face to the car, suspicion and awe mingling in his eyes. Elvis lifted a slender key attached to a single silver fob. "I want you to have it. Your name on the title. No one to know but us." The manager, alerted by the scene, hurried out. He wore a smile that froze into surprise when he recognized Elvis Presley in the moonlight. "Mr. Presley," he began, stammering. "Make it out to him," Elvis said, not taking his eyes off the cleaner. "No paperwork in my name." The manager glanced at the cleaner. Tears glimmered in the man's eyes behind a furrowed brow. He swallowed and raised his pen. Elvis stepped aside as the manager filled out the title. Maurice Johnson. The cleaner's hands shook as the pen hovered. Elvis clasped his shoulder. "Go on," he whispered. "It's yours." Maurice signed, print shaky but determined. He looked up, tears spilling as he took the keys. The cool metal felt foreign in his calloused palm. He looked to Elvis, words finally forcing their way free. I don't belong to this. I can't." Elvis smiled, gentle. "You belong wherever you choose to belong." Maurice exhaled, voice cracking. "But they'll fire me." Elvis's gaze never wavered. "Then you'll find something better." "You'll deserve it." Maurice stared at the shimmering car, as if his reflection in the windshield belonged to someone else. Around them, the salesman's lot lay empty, cars glinting like silent witnesses to a moment that would echo far beyond these lights. Elvis stepped back to the driver's side of the Cadillac. He opened the door of his own car and turned. "Drive home, Maurice. I'll take care of your old job." Maurice's shoulders trembled with gratitude and disbelief. He mutely nodded, sliding into the driver's seat as Elvis and his driver climbed back into the rear compartment. The engine purred to life, and Maurice rolled out, white Cadillac cutting a path through the dark toward a future he had never dared to imagine. Elvis leaned forward, resting an arm on the front seat's headrest. "Mama used to say," he began, voice thoughtful, "the measure of a man isn't in what he keeps, but what he gives away." His driver glanced back, eyes warm. "Right you are, boss." As the night swallowed Maurice's taillights, Elvis pressed a hand to the window. The sight of that shining car, once a distant dream, stirred something deep in his soul. He closed his eyes, imagining Maurice's face when dawn broke, and he realized this was no dream at all, but a gift born from an act of grace that even the hottest spotlight could never illuminate. The morning sunlight felt strange in the hushed showroom as the white Cadillac, now bearing Maurice Johnson's name in crisp block letters, rolled out onto Presley Boulevard. Word traveled fast among the street sweepers and tow truck drivers and the old men propping up coffee at Louis's place. Elvis Presley had quietly handed a Cadillac to a black cleaner. Rumors swirled. Some whispered admiration, others sniffed scandal. But Elvis himself paid it little mind. He slipped into his private touring car, the engine purring as he settled into leather seats, and let the day's events echo in his mind. Down at the Jefferson Avenue bar where Maurice had taken a seat, nursing his first free beer, the local Cadillac salesman found himself in a flurry. I never thought he'd do it," muttered Frank Bird as he recounted the story to a half-circle of barflies. Their faces turned from disbelief to respect. Even in this rough neighborhood, where lines of segregation pinched opportunity, something about Elvis's gesture felt revolutionary. Jerry Schilling, Elvis's longtime road manager and Memphis confidant, leaned against the bar's neon-faded sign and sipped black coffee. He'd driven the Cadillac back to Graceland himself, careful to leave Maurice in possession rather than parade the gift. "He's got a right to that car," Jerry told the group, voice low but firm. "He kept this place cleaner than half the streets I know. Elvis remembers." The others nodded, eyes brightening with approval. No one mentioned race. They spoke only of fairness, of a good man rewarded. In the back, a pair of men who'd once refused Maurice a seat on a bus that swayed down Main Street exchanged glances, shame flickering in the corners of their eyes. In the subtleties of that nod, Something in the neighborhood shifted. Here was a man who dared to right an old wrong, without fanfare or flashbulbs. Meanwhile, in the glossy offices of RCA's Midtown branch, the mood was electric. Press releases had already been drafted before Elvis returned from the showroom. A smiling photograph of him shaking the cleaner's hand, the gleam of the new Cadillac in the background. Publicity gold. But when Jerry entered the tall glass door and saw Colonel Tom Parker leaning over a typewriter, brow furrowed, he swallowed. "Jerry," Parker said, voice gravel and silk, "this could be the biggest PR coup since Heartbreak Hotel. We plaster this across the wire and watch the ad revenue roll in. Hell, we'll sell more records to every Southern housewife and frontier rancher." Jerry ran a hand through his hair. "Colonel, I know what you're thinking, but Elvis doesn't want this made a show. He gave that car in private. No cameras, no fanfare." Parker snorted. "Son, you think I'm gonna let an opportunity like this slide? The world's dying to see how America's king treats his people. We'll be heroes." Jerry squared his shoulders. "Elvis sees it differently. He just wanted to do right by the man who once warmed his kid's self and his mama when they had nothing. He doesn't want a parade. He wants Maurice to keep the car. And his dignity." The colonel's eyelids flickered. He tapped the typewriter. "You're telling me? No press?" "Yeah," Jerry said. "No press. If you can live with that." A silence settled between them, heavy with the pulse of commerce and conscience colliding. At last Parker nodded, though the click of his pen suggested he'd cook up something anyway. "All right, we'll hold our powder. But Jerry?" Jerry glanced up. Parker leaned back, fingers steepled. "Call me if Elvis changes his mind." That evening, Maurice sat behind the wheel of his Cadillac in his small front yard, the moonlight glinting off its pristine curves. He'd toggled the lights on and off, assured himself the engine still roared to life. Yet something made him uneasy. What if management at the dealership found out? What if his supervisor, an old guard unmoved by good intentions, pulled him from the schedule? What if he was fired on Monday morning, Cadillac or no Cadillac? He stood and walked along the asphalt ribbon of his driveway, the keys heavy in his hand. At the edge of the yard sat the old broom he used to sweep the showroom floor, its bristles worn to frayed stumps. Maurice sank beside it, head bowed. Pride warred with fear, regret with gratitude. He felt tears prick. The gift was too much, too public, too life-changing. He didn't deserve this, not after slaving in dingy corners for 3 decades. He sank to one knee, whispered into the night, "Please, God, I can't keep this." He held the keys out like an offering. By dawn's first light, he intended to place them on the dealership's desk and walk away. Maybe find work driving a bus again, or washing dishes at the diner. Anything to shed the burden. But before Maurice could follow through, Elvis stood quietly at the edge of the yard, black shadows under his brimmed hat. The soft crunch of gravel alerted Maurice, who looked up, startled. Elvis approached, gait steady as a metronome. "Morning, Maurice," Elvis said, voice warm as the Tennessee sun creeping over the cotton fields. The old man's fingers twitched around the keys. "Mr. Presley," he stammered, I shouldn't have taken this car. I'm fate. I'll lose my job." Elvis settled on the hood, folding one leg over the other. "I didn't give it to you because I wanted to see your name on a lot somewhere," Elvis said. "I gave it to you because you once gave me a place to rest when my world was falling apart. That was the only reason I could think of that felt right." He paused, eyes tracing the car's bodywork. "No one at the dealership will hear a word about it. I told them not to mention me, but you do have a job. You have this car. Now, drive somewhere you want to go." Maurice rose, hands trembling. "I don't know what to say." Elvis stood and placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "You don't have to say anything. If you ever need a friend, you know where to find me." Elvis tipped his head toward the horizon. "Go on now." Maurice swallowed, breath catching. "Thank you, sir." Elvis gave a small nod, then turned. Maurice watched as Elvis retreated down the gravel path and slipped behind the wheel of his own Cadillac, leaving Maurice's world, and his own, quietly changed. By the time the dawn was full and the cicadas resumed their chorus, Maurice's fear had ebbed, replaced by a new conviction. He climbed behind the wheel once more and guided the car down Jefferson Avenue, top down, the engine's roar bolstering his heart. He had right to this car, a right he and Elvis had seized in silence. No strobe lights, no crowds, just two men bound by an unspoken debt of kindness and memory. That day, Maurice drove to the barber shop he had dreamed of opening, pulled the Cadillac onto the curb, and stepped out feeling, perhaps for the first time, entirely at home. And back at Graceland, Elvis readied himself for the world tour, his spotlight burning ever brighter, knowing that his greatest act of generosity would never grace a headline, but lived on in the silent pride of a man who finally understood his own worth. Elvis Presley awoke before dawn to a note slipped under his dressing-room door at Graceland. Maurice Johnson had been let go. The words were brusque, typed on plain stationery, and bore the dealership's official letterhead. "Your employment is hereby terminated effective immediately." No explanation, no apology. Just a curt statement that Maurice could no longer walk through their showroom doors. Elvis folded the note twice, weighed it in his hand. The thought of Maurice, quietly nursing pride in his white Cadillac, only to be cast aside like yesterday's news, twisted Elvis's stomach into knots. By mid-morning, he instructed Jerry Schilling to pull his private Cadillac from the garage. They'd head to Maurice's neighborhood without fanfare, without witnesses, just as he'd given the car in secret. So would he offer solace in private. Maurice sat on his front steps, shoulders hunched, the sleek hood of his new Cadillac visible through the iron gate. He wore work boots and a faded collared shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He stared at the driveway's gravel, head bowed so no neighbor would recognize him behind the wheel. Each time he inhaled, the weight on his ribs flared. He clutched the car keys in both hands as though they might slip through his fingers and vanish. Fear and shame warred in his chest. How could he keep this gift? It had cost him more than he'd bargained for. Elvis and Jerry climbed from their car a few doors down. Elvis paused on the cracked pavement, surveying Maurice's modest home. A simple bungalow, whitewashed once, now streaked with age. A rose bush bowed beneath overgrown tendrils. A vinyl chair leaned against the porch column. Elvis stepped forward, each footstep quiet against the concrete. Jerry remained back, phone at the ready. Maurice heard them before he saw them, the soft click of Elvis's loafers on the driveway. He tensed, sliding off the step, the keys clinking as he moved them from hand to hand. When Elvis came into view, Maurice stared as though vision itself threatened him. "Elvis," Maurice rasped, voice rough, "you shouldn't have come." Elvis stopped 2 feet away, hands relaxed at his sides. His eyes held the same gentle depth Maurice had first seen beneath the showroom lights. "I had to," he said simply. "I heard you lost your job." Maurice's fingers fumbled the keys. "Yeah. They said I didn't belong behind that wheel. Said it reflected badly." He blinked fast, as if shame might drown him. I I asked them to take it back. I can't keep it when I haven't got a dime to my name." Elvis studied him, expression steady. "That car isn't a burden. It was meant to carry you forward." He reached into his jacket, withdrew a small envelope and pressed it into Maurice's hand. "This will cover any back pay they owe you. Consider it. Severance." Maurice's eyes filled with shock as he stared at the envelope's bulk. "But why? You've already given me enough." His voice cracked. "I don't deserve it." Elvis placed a hand on his shoulder, warm and reassuring. "You deserve the chance to stand again. The car and this are about more than wheels and money. It's your dignity." He paused, low voice unwavering. "No one should tell you otherwise." Maurice opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Bills and a note. "Stand tall, my friend. E.P." He looked up at Elvis, tears tracing lines down his dusty cheeks. Words hovered on his lips, then shattered in silence. Elvis nodded once and turned. "Drive it somewhere you choose," he said over his shoulder. Then he walked back down Maurice's driveway, disappearing down the street before Maurice could call his name. Word of Maurice's firing and Elvis's private intervention spread through Memphis like a soft wind through the cotton fields. It was almost too gentle to notice, yet impossible to ignore. Some neighbors shook their heads. How dare a superstar defy convention? Others whispered admiration for the man who gave without seeking credit. Elvis watched the chatter from a distance, restless, knowing that silence could only hold for so long. The following afternoon, the press descended on the Cadillac dealership, the same showroom that had employed and then summarily dismissed Maurice. Reporters clamored at the front entrance, cameras clicking as they waited for Elvis's arrival. Colonel Tom Parker, Elsie's manager, savored the moment, certain a photo op would soon follow. Instead, Elvis emerged alone, dressed simply in jeans and a denim shirt, aviators perched on his nose. He ascended the dealer's steps, halting beneath the same neon sign that had once signaled opulence to passing motorists. Journalists surged forward. "Mr. Presley, will you comment on this firing?" "What do you say to critics who call your gift publicity-seeking?" Flashbulbs snapped, capturing his still silhouette. Elvis raised a hand, motioning them back with one elegant sweep. The reporters tensed, mouths agape. Elvis spoke, voice carrying over the lot's stillness. "If that man's riding a Cadillac is somehow wrong, then I'd like someone to show me what's right. Should he have stayed stuck where he was? Should I let him go without a second chance? You all know his name now, Maurice Johnson. He did nothing but clean floors and treat people with respect. If I'm in the wrong for giving him an opportunity, then tell me what you'd do differently." A beat passed as the microphones flickered. The journalists lowered their cameras, jaws slack. No one challenged him. No one offered a retort. Elvis turned and walked away down the showroom's center aisle, each step measured, leaving the reporters in stunned silence. That evening, as lanterns flickered along the avenue and cicadas sang their final lullaby, Elvis sat at the Graceland piano and played a slow, soulful rendition of "That's All Right." The notes filled the study, weaving through the rafters like a blessing. He thought of Maurice, behind the wheel of his Cadillac, carrying dignity down broad Memphis streets. Elvis closed his eyes, imagining the road stretching before his old friend, open, bright, and unafraid. Because sometimes the greatest act of strength isn't found in power or in fame. It's in standing quietly beside someone and saying, "You belong here, with your dreams intact." And that understanding, he knew, echoed louder than any crowd's roar. The night air outside the Las Vegas Hilton trembled with anticipation as thousands filed into the showroom for Elvis Presley's final performance of the tour. Inside, The stage glittered under 70 lights, every lens focused on the man who commanded the nation's heartstrings. Yet in a quiet corner of the back row sat only one figure whose presence mattered more than the chorus of applause. A man in a modest dark suit, shoulders squared as though braced for remembrance. Maurice Johnson, once a humble showroom cleaner, now owned his own barbershop in Memphis, and tonight he held front-row tickets supplied by a friend who'd once stood in Elvis's shadow. As Elvis launched into his trademark opening riff, Maurice watched the stage's haze part to reveal the king in white. The crowd's roar thundered around him, but Maurice's ears pulsed only with the beat of his own heart. Memories surged, nicely, the note in his hands reading, "You belong wherever you choose to belong," and the simple line that had reshaped his life, "I hope you found your lesson." EP. 3 songs in, Elvis paused mid-verse, eyes drifting past the orchestra and the sea of faces to lock on Maurice. The band stuttered to a halt. Sweat glistened on Elvis's brow as he lowered the mic. The hush that fell was not born of fear, but of wonder, as thousands sensed something singular unfolding on stage. Elvis set aside his guitar and strode to the lip of the stage, spotlight cutting through the darkness. He held out one hand, an invitation as personal as any he had given before. Maurice rose, heart hammering, and made his way through the stunned throng. Security stepped forward but froze when they recognized the man whose name David Briggs, Elvis's pianist, had whispered in their ear earlier. Jerry Schilling, in a pressed suit, nodded to the guards, and the path cleared. Maurice's hands trembled as he scaled the few steps onto the stage, the boards vibrating with applause. Elvis met him center stage, shades off for the first time that night, revealing eyes bright with unshed emotion. Their gaze held for a moment that stretched into eternity. Without a word, Maurice closed the final yard between them and embraced Elvis with the fierce gratitude of a life transformed. Elvis's arms wrapped around him, steady and strong, the hush in the room now a testament to shared truth. When they parted, Elvis laid a hand on Maurice's shoulder and spoke, voice carried to every seat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, eyes shining, "this man taught me more than anyone ever has." The roar that followed drowned out the rest of the show. Cameras flashed as Elvis guided Maurice to the grand piano. Elvis sat and motioned for him to join. Maurice hesitated, then sat on the bench beside him, hands still shaking. Elvis winked at the audience and began a quiet riff on "If I Can Dream," Maurice's fingers brushing the keys uncertainly at first, then with growing confidence. The two voices, Elvis's rich baritone and Maurice's soft hum, wove the hymn of hope, a duet that transcended the spectacle and spoke directly to the human heart. When the last note faded, Maurice rose and stood momentarily before the crowd, as if in disbelief. He looked to Elvis, whose nod was both benediction and farewell. As the audience leapt to their feet, applauding and cheering, Maurice stepped back into Elvis's silhouette. The king placed an arm around him once more, their silhouettes framed by light, and led him off stage through a side curtain. Backstage, the dressing room buzzed with stagehands and musicians, but Elvis and Maurice stood alone before the full-length mirror. Elvis smiled, reaching into his jacket for a small gold pin, shaped like a Cadillac, and fastened it to Maurice's lapel. "Wear this," Elvis said, voice hushed, "to remember that one person's gift can drive us farther than any tour ever could." Maurice's eyes brimmed. He stood straighter than he had in years, feeling the weight of that pin not as a luxury, but as a symbol of dignity restored. Behind them, the distant echo of the encore drifted through the door, Elvis's final bow to the world. In that smoky backstage glow, two men from very different worlds shared a moment that no headline could capture. Elvis led Maurice to the exit, passing through a wall of admirers and lights until they emerged into the cool Las Vegas night. Music and applause still pulsed from the showroom, but for Maurice, all he heard was the steady beat of his own worth. As they parted ways, Elvis to fulfill a lifetime of crowds, and Maurice to return to his barbershop with a story beyond belief, they shared one last look. In Maurice's eyes burned the promise of possibility. In Elvis's, the quiet joy of a man who knew that true greatness lay not in spotlights, but in lifting others from the shadows. And so, the night closed not on a stage, but on two souls bound by an act of grace. For in the end, Elvis Presley's greatest tour was not the one written in contracts, but the journey he led a humble man through, and the anthem they composed together would echo far louder than any stadium roar. That one person, given a chance, can change more than any arena ever could.